worries. Okay, so our topic for the discussion is engineering entrepreneurs from job seekers to job creators. Now, as interesting as it is, education has always been at the top of the line, at the top of the game when it comes to creating employment, when it comes to creating entrepreneurs. So, if I may start, again, Agarwal, so if I may start with you, do you believe that engineering education should place more emphasis on entrepreneurship than traditional job placements?
Definitely, yes. There needs to be a more focus on the entrepreneurship side. At the moment, a very large fraction of our students are going for jobs in corporate world, and we need to uh, reorient many of their views to come up with the new ideas, develop it, and do a startup.
So, how would you say what is the requirements needed to make this shift happen?
One of the key things that is required, I should say two key things, I would say. One is that an curriculum which is partly also focused on the entrepreneurship side, which means offering of courses which allow them to explore this. More interestingly, offering of courses which allow students to actually develop ideas and build prototypes in that course. In fact, we have just started a master's program in medtech with the explicit charter of doing this. And the second pillar of this initiative would be uh, felicitation of our students who want to do a startup. There is always a pressure uh, in the among students, their families, that okay, if they do a startup, not take up a job through the placement mechanism on campus, then 2 years down the line, if they don't succeed, then they will miss the bus of getting a job as well. So a policy, the institution needs to create a policy that allow the students to defer their placement and come back in case they don't succeed in the startup, which is quite possible, and still make use of all the facilities of the institute for placements.
Okay. So similarly, if I ask Rajan sir that, what is your thought on understanding that do we need that shift? And if yes, if we need the shift of engineering colleges making, more opportunities for entrepreneurship, putting more emphasis on entrepreneurship than the traditional job placements. What do you think, or do you, second Agarwal sir's points, or what else do you think is required to make that shift happen in today's date?
Thank you so much. So let me kind of start with my thoughts on this entrepreneurship. So if you really look at it among a large majority of students, I think the people who would be pursuing entrepreneurship, I think it is actually going to be a very small percentage. Even if you really look at some of the advanced economies like the US and so on, I mean, it's a hardly 5 to 10% of from the campus. So when we really look at entrepreneurship as something starting on their own, I would not really expect a large majority of the students to actually get into entrepreneurship right after graduate from college. But what can really happen is being entrepreneurial, right? Entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial are slightly different things. So in my view, I think 100% of the students can become entrepreneurial. Entrepreneurial means that the ability to be taking initiative, ability to be innovative, ability to take risk. So these are all some features that are qualities of what we call as being entrepreneurial. So today, even if students are joining established, the students, they prefer the students to be entrepreneurial, even they are working in large organizations. So my view is that I think education should, in a way, that ensure that students become entrepreneurial. Entrepreneurial is one of the important, like the way students learn, I think students can also become entrepreneurial. And I think almost 100% of the students should actually become entrepreneurial. Now, what is it that can be done to make students get into entrepreneurship and also become entrepreneurial? I want to kind of look at it in two different aspects. So let me first start with entrepreneurship, because I think that is what I think the focus of the conference today. So most of the students today who are studying in colleges, they are, I would say, coming from family backgrounds where the parents are either working for government or private corporations or essentially in the organized sector. Okay? A large majority of them are coming from family backgrounds who don't really have any business background. So actually a lot of difficulties for first generation entrepreneur to start something on their own, right? Because there is no enough background which help him to get into the direction which university can do, because university is essentially a melting pot of minds coming from different backgrounds. What an university can do is expose them to the entrepreneurship is all about, right? So I'm sure that today most of the institutions are having very formal ways to do that. We have courses, we have institutional mechanisms such as incubators, pre-incubators, innovation labs, and so on and so forth. But apart from this very formal institutional structures that exist, I think students learn a lot through an informal way of interaction between themselves. So I think to get into entrepreneurship, many of the students would need what is called as a brush with entrepreneurship. And they should be given opportunities to interact with entrepreneurs way of, let us say, invited lectures, by way of workshops. That can happen on a very informal basis without any proper, what I would call it, very formal institution. In addition to that, the students could also be encouraged to take up some kind of roles in entrepreneurial organization, because the best way is to be for themselves, right? One is to hear, but more importantly, they can see and experience. So they could actually be what I would say is encouraged to take up internships in maybe entrepreneurial organizations, right? Startups, SMEs, which are all essentially entrepreneurial organizations. Students actually have many levels of interns. I mean, they can do it winter internship, summer internship, and so on. But if institutions can actually encourage students to take up interns in an entrepreneurial organization, I think that would give them a very, very big exposure to what entrepreneurship is all about. And they will be able to kind of appreciate the difference in an entrepreneurial organization, appreciate the enjoyment, appreciate the difficulties in an entrepreneurial setup as compared to bigger organization.
Understood, understood.
Next comes to how can a student, yeah, sure.
Mr. Raja, I'll come back to you on this. But since you
Yeah.
mentioned about directions, on this I would also like to, understand Mr. Pant's view. Like, what specific role should engineering institutions play in order to, create that environment, that entrepreneurial mindset, rather, for students, and what initiatives can be taken upon that that actually is practical and that can actually be implemented?
I have to answer, right? Yeah. So thank you for your question. I think this is a very pertinent point when you talk about how academic institutes, right, or institutes like IIT and IT can, right, develop the skill of entrepreneurship, right, and going and seeking for the right, their own industry rather giving the jobs to many. When you look at that, the first thing is that, right, how the curriculum should be developed, and already the National Education Policy 2020 has made it possible that most of the courses are now industrial oriented. The education system has changed. And when you look at that, the students, right, during their first year, second years, right, they have been asked to visit the industries also, nearby local industries, MSMEs, right, interact with these entrepreneurs, those who have got the success, interact with the alumni, right, those who are already in the top positions and have their own, right, startups or own industry. that gives a kind of training, right? Because the living lab concept and more type of war rooms, right, which are through AI and ML, these kind of tools, right? This is possible. So now they have the access to all kind of tools. So in that way, when these right a kind of tinkering lab during their second years, the ability to think critically and a teamwork. So because that is very, very important nowadays. The branch of science and engineering where we are earlier days, right? The students were looking only for the job. Now this is no more important. So a good entrepreneurship, right, should have all kind of right engineering skills. So how the education can become right can be made multidisciplinary has become a challenge. And so now all institutes almost they have now the major degree and the minor degree. And also the projects have been assigned in such a way that now the it has the through STEM, what we call science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and management, right? And that is very, very important. So a lot of these microeconomics, economics, business-oriented courses are involved in all branches of science and engineering. The risk-taking capability, as already has been mentioned, that a good entrepreneurship should have that ability to take risk, right? So they should be trained in such a way that the failure is not right. It's a part of life, and from that failure, how to learn the things and then come back again and bring the right maybe with the right stand up with more and more right enthusiasm. That's very, very important. So the courses, their mental right strength, their ability to take risks, and the lot of right where how to take where from the loan will taken, how the because the government has now initiated in the new budget lot of policies also, right, up to 20 lakhs the loans. The institute itself they have lot of the incubation centers where the fundings are available. So all these things they have to learn, and that is where I think when all these things are done and the holistic development of these, right, then they can be a good entrepreneurship. At the same time, right, I will not be in favor of that. That when we say that the all engineers should be the entrepreneurship, there is a it should be a good balance. But when you see look at the kind of startups, so generally when the startup comes, right, all startups may not lead to success. But this is again a part of life. So I think the teamwork and their capability to take risks, and if they are succeeding, right, I think they will become the role model. That is where the all these young generation they should look at the seniors that and what kind of challenges they have faced. I think such kind of brainstorming sessions, workshops, seminars should be conducted in the institute with their alumni, right, and several other successful right businessmen. They should be invited. Their success story, their failure story, how did they struggle in the life, and then how did they become that kind of entrepreneurship, the levels where they have reached. So all these case studies should be right told to the student. I think then they will be success. They will be succeed in their time.
Understood. So, uh, Pansa, you mentioned word startup that in this startup ecosystem. Uh, Agrawal sir, I would like to actually come to you on this. That in the current startup ecosystem that we are in, how important is funding for these engineering entrepreneurs who are planning to transition from job seekers to job creators? How difficult or how challenging is it for those students to get that funding from in the startup ecosystem?
Yeah, of course it is challenging because during their learning stage they don't have any idea about the investors. They don't have the idea how to get the funds and how to apply for the loans. But that's what I told you that with the case study, right, they will be able to learn, and with the teamwork also they will be able to learn. So now government has created a lot of initiatives also that right they have given the up to 20 lakhs, right, the opportunity. They are going to have their own startup. Even the institutes also at IIT Roorkee, like if we get the ideas and the startups are coming to some level, we pay up to 50 lakh for them, right? And we give them the time also, a semester or a year break also, where they can just take right the lead and look forward for the startup, and then again come back and do their study. So I think there are a lot of now the right the banking finance company those who are providing the support. So, and at the same time, because if the startup gets failure, they should have that kind of mental strength, right? That this kind of failure is also part of learning, and they have to look forward, right, again with that right kind of failure and reinvest again. Because when I always tell the student, right, in first year of the startup, the business will not be profit. They have to bring a level, right, maybe up to 2 years or 3 years, it will come to a level of break-even point, and then the profit will come. So they have to keep that thing in mind that they have to be patient, right, when they do this kind of business, because the success will take time, the profit, right, will take time to come. So for all these things, they have to be strong. The funding agencies are there. Risk-taking capabilities should be there in the business, and that is true with every business.
Understood. Agarwal sir, your thoughts on this? Actually, I wanted to ask you this, that what challenges do you think that are there when it comes to the startup ecosystem?
Well, there are two kinds of challenges when you talk about funding. The first one is the seed funding, when you need some money to start going. And that is not a very significant challenge today because there are a number of schemes from the government and elsewhere that provide this nucleating grant, which makes the students start working for a couple of years. The bigger challenge comes then. So suppose the startup has started to take off, and they need to expand. And at that point, they need a funding which is of the order of a few crores, typically. Of course, this varies from domain to domain, but the ballpark figure. This is too large for any seed funding initiative to support, too small for a private investor, venture capitalist to get interested. And that is where there is a bit of a gap. And everybody has been trying to figure out a way to bridge this gap through means some raise some funding from the government side or have some private investors who are interested in taking such funding possibilities. But that remains a bit of a challenge. Once the startup grows further and has now products which has paying customers, then the venture funding round opens up, and then of course if they are doing well, they can raise good amount of money.
Understood. Rajan sir, coming to you on this, that while we are talking about startups, with the rise of this new age startup that we see, what strategy should the engineering students employ in order to not only sustain but be there in this highly competitive market, to thrive rather in this market? What do you think what are the strategies that they should employ in order to thrive?
I think let me also kind of follow up a little bit on the funding side, because your question is very related to that. See, first of all, if you look at a startup, which is, when I say engineering, I am kind of equating it to what is called as a deep tech startups, which are substantial, innovation and technology to address a given entrepreneurial opportunity. So deep tech startups need substantial funding to start with, right? Unlike the traditional services-based startups, which can quickly generate revenues and use those revenues to be able to fuel further growth and development. In the case of a deep tech startup, the initial product development is going to take a lot of time, and it will involve substantial investment. So, and given also the fact that most of the students are not from wealthy backgrounds or business backgrounds, they will have to look at funding externally. So in this case, I think the incubators in the respective institutes, they play a very important role because this is an area where we have been researching quite a bit. And then if you kind of look at it, for startups to get funded, in today, the percentage of getting startups that are getting funded is like about 10% or so, right? Whereas an incubated startup, the likelihood of an incubated startup getting funded is 6 to 7 times higher than a startup that is not getting incubated, right? So the chances of getting funded dramatically improves once you are part of an incubator, right? And today, most of the educational institutions are having a very active incubator. And this incubator not only gives them the support, right, labs or office space or secretarial or accounting and other forms of support, it fundamentally dramatically improves the funding opportunity. Second, many of the traditional research-based funding are today encouraging product development. Right? For example, the traditional DST funding, DBT funding, which are mostly for projects, they are now more favorable towards product development. So the student has a very important resource that he can access to, which are the faculty members. So many of this product development funding can actually be obtained through writing research proposals and research grants jointly with the faculty members. So that the very, very risky funding, the initial very risky part of the startup can actually be supported through some of the research funding schemes that are available from DST and DBT. So I'm not talking about the entrepreneurial grants like the Nidhi Prayas or the Nidhi Seed Fund scheme. I'm talking about purely the research proposal funding that actually happens. And once you are able to secure certain amount of research funding, then the substantial commercial funding can actually start. Either it could be government funding, angel funding, venture capital funding, and so on and so forth. But nevertheless, as you're mentioning that how can a startup survive? Because ultimately a startup is a story, and for the story to kind of come out, they need to be able to survive. And for them to survive, it is important that they manage their resources in a very, very judicious manner. Right. So my advice to entrepreneurs would be to kind of do what is called as practice frugality. Right. I think today frugality is considered to be one of the essential elements for successful entrepreneurship. Most of the entrepreneurs tend to kind of burn a lot of cash initially without making adequate progress on the product development side. Frugality ensures that product development and cash burn happens side by side, right? And so it's very important entrepreneurs understand the importance of frugality. Entrepreneurs also, many of the entrepreneurs in science and technology backgrounds don't really have the exposure to financial management, right? Financial management with respect to cash flows, sources of capital, and so on. I think they should understand the importance of financial management. They can be technocrats, no doubt, but then when they jump into entrepreneurship, it is important that they also understand very prudent fiscal management. So these are the skills that they need to develop so that they are able to sustain their venture for some time, so that the market can then decide, whether it has potential or not potential. The infant mortality, that is, before even the green shoots coming up, and if the business collapses before that happens, then it is a tragedy. I'm sure incubators are today doing their level best to ensure that the startups are able to survive for some time, and then decide whether they're going to be sustainable in the long run or not.
Thank you. Thank you so much, all the fellow panelists. I would have asked more questions. I definitely had, but the time shows it's up. So thank you so much, all of you, to take your time out and be a part of the conclave. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, your lovely audience. We can have a clap.
Yeah.